Thank you all very much for having me here. I'm going to share a PowerPoint presentation. Now, I'm not going to speak entirely and exclusively about Romanian cases of populism. I'm going to start, if not ab gemino ovo, at least from a few literary, biblical and theoretical points. In Julius Caesar, as you well know, Mark Antony comes to present Caesar's corpse to the public, to the people. And the first word that is important for us is people, because populism is a derivative of people. So let's take a look at the people first. This is what happens in Shakespeare's Julius Caesar. The citizens, after hearing Brutus tell them that Caesar was a tyrant, agree with him. They say, this Caesar was a tyrant. Nay, that's certain. We are blessed that Rome is rid of him. But then Mark Antony comes and talks to them and tells them how much Caesar loved them and starts even bribing the people by telling them that Julius Caesar left him his private parks and the sum of money to each citizen, right? Give me more, as you said yesterday. And then the citizens shift in their opinions and they start regretting Caesar. Oh, noble Caesar, oh, woeful day, oh, traitors, villains, oh, most bloody sight, we will be revenged. Revenge about, seek, burn, fire, kill, slay, let not a traitor live. And this is a staggering, it's a breathtaking change of position that happens within a few minutes. We have seen something similar in the Gospels, of course. On Palm Sunday, Jesus enters Jerusalem and is welcomed as a redeemer, both political and religious, I should say. They expect him to also be a political leader, king. And as John tells us, on the next day, much people that will come, this is King James's version, on the next day, much people that will come to the feast, when they heard that Jesus was coming to Jerusalem, took branches of palm trees and went forth to meet him and cried, Hosanna, which means save us now, immediately, if it's possible, don't wait any longer. Hoshiana in Hebrew. Blessed is the King of Israel that cometh in the name of the Lord. And just a little time later, when the same people are asked to choose between the man they hailed as their savior and king and Barabbas, they chose Barabbas. Then cried they all again, saying, not this man, but Barabbas. So much about the fickleness of crowds, so much about the people. And the people, of course, are at the core of both what we call today popular parties, Christian Democrats, if you want. The Italians among you will instantly recognize Luigi Sturzo's Appello ai Liberi e Forti, and the populist parties. So there is this common etymon, people, populus, in both popular and populist. What's the difference between popular and populist? As Emile Poulain wrote in an article, popular parties were born, especially in Catholic Europe, after the First World War, as the expression of the two forces ignored by the liberal project of the 19th century, the people and the church. So popular parties as a re-emergence of the people, but also of Christianity, directly represented by the church. As opposed to the popular movement, populist movements or parties or discourses generally posit a separation of society into two homogeneous and antagonistic groups. The pure people, that is the people is always good by definition. They're always right. And of course, the corrupt elite. And thus populism argues that politics should be an expression of the volonté générale of the people, if possible, direct government, and the, a revolution against the corrupt elites, if possible. I like particularly the definitions proposed by two Belgian scholars from Leuven, Koen Abts and Stefan Roemens, who define populism as a thin-centered ideology which advocates the sovereign rule of the people as a homogeneous body, or political mobilization, charismatic leadership, and simplistic language are considered the characteristics of populism. But this, of course, would, in terms, be too simple. A few questions should be asked if we don't want to be populists and to just condemn populism right away. in order to place ourselves on the right side of things, right? Is populism inherent to democracy? That is to say, to popular democracy, to the rule by the people. Is populism inherent in the age of the revolt of the masses, as Ortega y Gasset called them, la rebelión de las masas, or in the society of the spectacle defined from the left by Guy Debord and from the right by Vargas Llosa? Can the egalitarian passion that was already observed by Alexis de Tocqueville in America result in the abolition of man, as C.S. Lewis called it? That is to say, we are all equal to the point of becoming indistinct, even sexually, nationally, linguistically, and from all points of view. Can it transform freedom into the tyranny of the people, the tyranny of the masses, of the multitude, of the majority, and diversity into indistinction? Can today any political party, including the center ones or the traditional ones like CDU or, I don't know, the Tories or the Labour in England, can any party succeed today without populist elements in their discourse? That is to say, flattering the masses and pretending to offer more, giving more. Are traditional doctrinal parties doomed? And will the populist discourse take over? Is populism an infection of the body politic, the worst thing that can happen to a democracy? Or is it just a fever, a symptom of an infection that is working in the political body, and therefore the beginning of a response? And finally, is populism just a label to slander everybody who you don't like? For example, I don't know, Orban Viktor in Hungary. You will tell me more. Is it, or the Polish Christian parties that are governing? Is populism just an easy label that progressives are using to label anyone they don't like? And very often Christians themselves, who would rather like to define themselves popular, following Luigi Sturzo, than populist, of course, as is sometimes the case. And now let us take a look at the Romanian system to have a few ideas about what it looks like in our country. Now, the Romanian political system nowadays is extremely simple, and we have two traditional parties who are roughly equal. The National Liberal Party, which is affiliated to the EPP in Europe, established in 1875, initially a rather leftist liberal party, nowadays becoming more and more liberal conservative and also Christian Democrat. The Socialist Democrat Party, Social Democrat Party, PSD, which is the inheritor of the Communist Party and of the Socialists of the Transition, they are affiliated to the SND in Brussels, and they were established after the revolution in 1989. And then there is a Hungarian party, but that's an ethnic party. It's affiliated to the EPP. We are not going to discuss about it. And then there are two new entries on the political stage. One of them, Save Romania Union, affiliated to Renew Europe, called USR and now united with another little party, Plus. And finally, AUR, Alliance for the Romanian Unification, affiliated or trying to get affiliated to the ERC, established in 2019. So you see two recent entries. Now, I consider both of these populist parties, and I'm going to analyze very quickly their discourse to see what they have in common, although they are very different from each other. I think that this picture shows you everything you need to know about the AUR party. AUR in Romanian means gold, like oro in Italian, right, and or in French. And you see it's yellow. And it also shows you the map of Greater Romania. I suppose the Hungarians also have it hidden in some corners or drawers, the map of Greater Hungary. I'm from Transylvania, so I'm not very favorable to Greater Hungary. I prefer things to stay as they are, and allegedly they will. But the idea that the country has to be reunified, including Moldova, which has been lost to the Soviets, and that's a fair thought, of course. The name AUR, gold, sends to a popular song that everybody knows in Romania, which goes, our mountains carry gold, but we beg from door to door, which is obviously a very easy anti-xenophobic rhetoric. Romania has been sold to the EU, to Germany, to France. They are dictating here. You know the discourse from other parts of Europe as well. Euroscepticism, of course, accompanies it. And then you see it uses the image of the church. This is the leader of the party, dressed in popular traditional peasant's costume, an Orthodox church in the background, and the national flag, of course, in the background. The origin of the current leader is very easy. He comes from football ultras. So he was one of those galleries of hooligans, or perhaps not so much hooligans, before turning that into politics with roughly the same methods and discourse, national and identitarian discourse. Their discourse is generally oriented against foreign investors, against everything that is foreign, actually. Here is one of their posters: forests belong to us, and so do the mountains. Everything belongs to us, and we are being robbed by foreign timber factories, be they Austrian, German, Swedish, or Norwegian, or whatever. The other party appears to be quite the opposite. You see, they speak English. Romania must be a modern country to live your future in. Of course, that's a very respectable ideal, and who could contradict that? It's called Save Romania. It's Euro-enthusiastic. It calls itself progressive. It is very markedly anti-clerical, and it declares itself, like the other, a grassroots movement. Although, as some people say, it has massive establishment and foreign support. Foreign support, especially from Macron, and establishment, I mean the secret services, that's my interpretation, and all other parts of the establishment. Both of these actually are emanations of the establishment to a great extent, although they pretend to be grassroots. And we recognize the discourse that we had in Italy, and I think Romania very much imitates Italy nowadays after Mani Pulite and the demise of the old parties, Democrazia Cristiana, Socialists. Someone who was very linked to the establishment, to Craxi, Berlusconi, using a slogan from football, Forza Milan, Forza Italia, created a party which gradually actually became quite conservative and Christian democratic and increasingly less populist, as it were. Or in Greece, of course, Syriza, which puns on the word Syriza from the roots, radically. So you see, grassroots and radicalism often go together. And they claim that the people is taking back the power that had been confiscated by the corrupt elites. The salvation rhetoric that the Savior Romanian Union has is well known to anyone who has studied history. Of course, in France, they called it Comité du Salut Public. They created it in France in April 1793, just a few months after beheading King Louis XVI, and that was the beginning of the terror, of course. They didn't save anything. They murdered plenty of people, just like the Bolsheviks in Russia and the Nazis in Germany. Immediately after the revolution in December 1989, another creation emerged in Romania, which was called Frontul Salvării Populare, the front of popular salvation. You see both naționale, I wrote populare. So you see the same salvation rhetoric. Well, for us Christians, salvation comes from the Savior, not from politics and from politicians. And that's one of the things in which we can work as a corrective against populism. We don't believe that we can be saved here and now on earth and immediately, as some charismatic political movements propose. There is a revolutionary rhetoric inherited by all these movements. You see here a poster of USR saying, "Join us, be part of the good government revolution." And they often refer to themselves as revolutionary new men, of course, being a rhetoric that for us Christians means the newborn, regenerated man, born again from sin through St. Paul, and we refer to St. Paul's words, not to the Bolshevik or, I don't know, revolutionary rhetoric. But they like to call themselves new men, new people. Romania without theft, free of stealing. Who doesn't want that? Who doesn't want to live in a country that is free from corruption? And God knows that Romania has had very many corrupt regimes, just like most countries in Europe. Of course, there is less corruption, apparently, in countries like, from the West and more in the East and South, but that's perhaps very often more appearances than reality. There is also a very strong anti-clerical rhetoric in this party. One of the main buildings in Bucharest nowadays is the Orthodox Cathedral. Bucharest lacks an Orthodox cathedral. The only cathedral it has is a very small church from the 17th century, and now a large cathedral is built. The church is assimilated to the corrupt establishment in the rhetoric of this party, so that you see here a poster saying no public money for the cathedral, although this cathedral had been planned after the Romanian unification in 1918 and has been a long-standing desideratum. So there are two different, another rhetoric of this party is we want hospitals, not cathedrals, as if the church were opposed to health. And you see the public health, lay secular health, being the opposite of what Christians believe in. This is a type of populism that people don't generally discuss, but it exists in Romania. Now, what is the relation between church and state, church and politics, and how is the situation in Romania? Sometimes the church has been pandering to these populist movements. And here you see the Archbishop of Constanța, which is at the Black Sea, one of the important counties in Romania on the Black Sea. He's called Teodosie, who was a great friend of a politician, a corrupt politician, Radu Mazăre. He dressed as Che Guevara. That is one of his usual costumes. Archbishop Teodosie didn't see that contrary to Christian faith, glorifying a communist terrorist. And nowadays, this bishop is encouraging the populist discourse of aur, of gold, which is anti-European, skeptical against vaccines, generally skeptical against anything that is not homespun and traditional, as it were. But he was also pandering to the former social democrats. And this is why, rightly so at times, the other anti-clerical party in Romania is accusing the Orthodox Church in particular. What is the correct position of the church and how can it contribute to counter populism? The first important thing is that the church and we Christians altogether function as an intermediary body between the citizen, the human person, and the state which claims to be the only source of salvation, of education, of everything in our modern welfare, providence, nanny state. The church also safeguards the freedom of expression in a context in which it is being attacked from all sides, and especially from the progressive left. I place progressive between brackets in most cases. The church is thus limiting statal and secular claims at dominance and also at being the only regulator in society. Christianity can also counter the zeitgeist, which quite often, both through nationalism and anti-clericalism, through rampant and aggressive secularism, and through identitarian, let's say, egotism, goes against Christian universalism. Christian universalism is actually a very good antidote to nationalism all over the place in Europe. Discerning Christians who are able to realize that some discourses are corrosive can indeed be the salt of the earth. I started with a definition, with passages from the Gospel of John and from Shakespeare's Julius Caesar, to show that the very core of populism is a flawed understanding of the people as a perfect entity which is incorrupt and can receive salvation here on earth. Christian anthropology, with its understanding of the fallen human nature, of sin, with its great historical experience and with its high culture, can resist populist anti-cultures, and also progressive optimism, which is also some kind of populism, which tells people that they can have everything perfectly here and now, of course. Moderation, skepticism, a sense of hierarchy, which goes counter to populism. Christian personalism, which goes counter to leveling and indistinction, and communitarianism, which are characteristic of populism. A sense of tradition, which goes counter to progressive oblivion, and a relativization of political power. And the idea of moral improvement, which must be undertaken personally and not be expected from an exterior entity, are also Christian correctives to current populism, and not only to populism, also to establishmentarianism, to political claims at exclusivity. These are a few thoughts that I wanted to contribute this morning. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. I want to thank you for the kind invitation to this very challenging session, and my special thanks to colleague Professor Papahagi, who helped me in the general and theoretical introduction about what we have to understand when we say populism. That is effectively a new word. It was not so popular a word in the political language until a few decades ago, but now it appears to be a key word to understand where we are. Okay, we can go and start with the first slide, introducing you to the Italian study case. I am very thankful for the colleague who introduced a general concept of the phenomenon, so I have the possibility to enter straight into the Italian case. To understand what is the Italian populism, we have to refer to the big political crisis of the 90s. The 90s were marked by tangentopoli. Tangentopoli is a neologism to express a massive case of political correction. In one sense, it was the end of a political era. In fact, the judiciary took the main role in the Italian political system. In some sense, the judiciary substituted to the classic democratic political dynamics. It happens that in a very, very limited period of time, I'm speaking of one year and a half, the historical political system that was started in Italy after World War II collapsed, dramatically collapsed. It is the case of the communists who changed their name and dissolved the parties after the fall of the Berlin Wall. But it was the case of the socialists as well of the Christian Democrats who were involved in very serious trials because it happened that their leaders and the establishment of the parties appear to be dramatically corrupted. Corruptions seem to be a structural aspect of the Italian political system. There was no any possibility for a company to work without contributing to the party, and of course in a very illegal way. And this was made clear in the early 90s, thanks to tangentopoli or manipulita, as the colleague mentioned before. So this was a real destruction of the historical political system. And the problem was that just only 10 years later, this phenomenon of the new political system that started after the collapse of the historical party system happened to challenge the economic crisis. From 2011, Italy has been affected by the economic crisis, and the pandemic just make deeper this crisis. These two elements, the collapse of the historical political system, started after World War II in Italy with strong popular parties, not populist parties, popular parties as communists, socialists, Christian Democrats, and the rise of the economic crisis created a very serious political turmoil. And when the old political system collapsed, we assisted to the insurgence of new political actors. And the first of these political actors, we can change our slide, as you know, has been Berlusconi and Forza Italia. Who is Berlusconi is very clear. I assume that most of you experienced his politics since he has been a prominent Italian leader in the 90s, and for at least 20 years he was a magnate. He was corrupted. It is not a speculation. He was a corrupted person. He got his big money thanks to corruption with the old political system. But paradoxically, he got his new fame and his new role expressing himself of the clean hero struggling corruption. He was the new man, so to say, not the corrupted one, the one who could overcome decades of massive and endemic corruption. This was not true, but this was what appeared thanks to a massive campaign managed by the media. Berlusconi is a tycoon. He owns papers, 3 major TV channels. So he succeeded to create for himself the idea that it was really something new in the political system, not the past dynamic of the parties. So he pretended not to create a party. Party was a wrong word, so to say. He wanted to create a movement. The idea of movement seems to be more appealing because the party was too ideological, too strict. The movement appeared to be more familiar with some new sector of people who were fed up of the corruption and of the strong political system, whole political system. His language was shaped according the company language where he was trained, and it used words coming from the soccer team experience. He was the president of Milan, as it was mentioned. So the success he got in the sport was in some sense intertwined with his political success and consensus. What he did something very interesting. He appealed to the silent people. Not those who were demonstrating, not those who were active in unions, in political system, in intellectual debates, in the public debate. He appealed to those who were silent, those who were the working class without any special relation with the unions, without struggling for their rights. And this appeal to people who were usually silent was very, very successful in terms of electorate. The easy slogan he adopted was less taxes for everyone. That it is a typical classic populistic approach. Who does not want to pay less taxes? And this was very effective in terms of consensus. And in fact, he succeeded to put himself in a few years at the center of the Italian political system. He did not get enough vote to rule alone. So he did something that never happened. He decided to approach the neo-fascists who claim to be post-fascist, and for the first time, he involved them in ruling the country. There was a sort of constitutional covenant among the anti-fascist parties not to include the neo-fascist party in any Italian coalition. And more or less, This covenant worked for decades. Berlusconi in the 90s was the first who opened the door to the neo-fascists, and he ruled the first government, including the neo-fascists in the coalition. In those years, he opened a direct, strong confrontation with the judiciary. He was involved in many trials. He's still involved, but in any case, he expressed the idea of the strong Italian worker who struggles against the big powers. Doesn't mind if he is a real magnate and he expresses the power, but he succeeded to introduce himself as a person struggling against the historical powers of the Italian political system. He is the first of a series of other actors. So we can change the slide and we can go to Bossi and the Northern League. The Northern League was the new party started in the 90s on the wave of Tangentopoli. So this massive reaction against the endemic corruption in the Italian political system. And he very clearly adopted a secessionist platform. He did not target the Italians. He decided as a leader to target only the people in the north. You are very aware that Italy has a very fragmented economy. When we refer to the north, we refer to the wealthiest area of the country. There are some regions of the north that have a NGP very similar to NGP of Germany. Just to give you an idea, on the contrary, the south in some region is very underdeveloped. So his idea was, we are the working class of the north. We express the interest of the dynamic party of the country. We don't want to be united. If Italy would be just the north, Italy would be at the center of the European development. So to give a sort of a theory to this political program, he created the mythology of Padania. Padania is a term expressing a geographical area crossed by the Po River. So basically, it referred to a region that politically and physically never existed, crossed by the Po, that is inhabited by the people of the north. So he created this confrontation between north and south, and in some sense, it was a successful strategy. In fact, he succeeded to appeal to the middle class, to those who were workers, who paid good taxes, probably too much taxes, and he expressed the interest of specific sectors of the Italian population. He adopted also a cultural strategy to enforce his political program. So he adopted, for instance, a neo-pagan rhetoric. He made the special religious ceremony to the god Po. Po is the river crossing Padania. So Po is the life, so to say, of the people in the north. And in this sense, he entered a very strong contrast with the Catholic Church. Why? Because the Catholic Church is too benevolent with the immigrants, too benevolent with the poor, too benevolent with the people in the south. To create this rhetoric, he adopted a very racist language. So those who were living in the south were people who didn't want to work. They were just assisted by the rich north, the people of Padania, and his language, that was very rude and very direct, had a very strong positive effect. And it became interesting for Berlusconi, who decided to involve Bossi too in his coalition. So, of course, entering the government, Bossi had to soften his language, but this was the base, the ideological base of his politics for 10, 20 years. We change slide and we go to another actor that is more recent, is Grillo and the Five-Star Movement. What is the strategy? The strategy, I'm sorry to use this word, is fascism. Fascism is the strategy they adopted, organize the fake days, I am serious, the big gathering where all the people were insulting the ruling class, the system, in a very populist way. There was any mediation between the presumed interest and identity of the people and the political system. The people has to go to the center of the political system. And he was a sort of prophet of an apocalyptic change. Everything will change when the movement will go to the power. They started with a strong anti-Europe platform, and he was presenting himself as a sort of Moses, bringing the people in a new world. His rhetoric was typical of a preacher more than a politician. His political, ideological platform was very confused. He was not progressive. He claims not to be progressive. He claims not to be conservative. He claims not to be moderate. But it is not clear what he is at this point. Of course, when the Star movements entered into the government, this language was softened, so to say. Nevertheless, this ideological confusion, post-ideological approach is still very, very strong. What is to be said is that the big achievement of the Five Stars movement was to bring in politics a new generation of people. The parliamentarians of the Five Stars movement who are in the current parliament are very young people, and this is something important because honestly all the other parties have a very, very age representation. Since it is a post-ideological movement and party, the Five Stars movement does not have a clear strategy of alliances. The allies are those who are useful to the cause of the movement. So it happened in 1 year that the same movement made a government with the Conservative Party, with the Northern League and Berlusconi, and in a very short time they changed dramatically and now are in power with also progressive parties. So it's a very, very, very confusing approach, very acrobatic, so to say, in the ideology, but it expresses the sense of terrorists of many, many sectors of the Italian voters who are fed up with what they call the old politics, the old system. It is not finished because we have now another actor that is in some sense the continuation, if you want, in other words and with other strategies of the Northern League that now is not Northern anymore. Now is a national party. So the League, led by Matteo Salvini, abandoned the secessionist platform. On the contrary, Salvini is very active in campaigning in the South, and he got very, very strong political results in the South too. He is still anti-European. The basic pillars of his policy are an anti-immigration approach, dramatically anti-immigration approach, severely anti-immigration, and Islamophobic. I could mention a very very strong initiative he took when he was a Minister of Interiors, and he succeeded to close some mosques and Islamic centers. He was censored by the European Union for his migration policies. Exactly on the opposite of his mentor, Bossi, Salvini now claims to be a good Catholic. And if the original Northern League was a neo-pagan in his approach, think of the blessing of the god Paul, now the new league is strongly Catholic. And it is very strong in the political use of religious symbols and traditions. Think about the rosaries, always shown as is in picture, nativity scenes, crucifix everywhere. Catholicism is a sort of specific element of the Italian identity. Of course, in this sense, those who are not Catholic are not really parts of the Italian community. Xenophobia is a political glue for his program, and migrants are the escaping goats. The crisis in Italy, the financial crisis, economical crisis, has been very, very severe. Who is responsible for that? The migrants. We have corruption, the migrants. We have political disorder, the migrants. The migrants have been indicated with the escaping goats responsible for all the problems of our country. We have a new actor, so we can change the slide. And after so many men, I want just to conclude that the stronger opposition to this populist approach comes from the churches, and I want to mention Pope Francis, and in their modest entity, the role of the Protestant churches. What has been the major achievement of the ecumenical action against populism has been a comprehensive program to welcome migrants and refugees. Probably some of you are aware of the humanitarian corridors. This has been an Italian experience, an ecumenical experience, and in this sense, the churches succeeded to offer another opposite voice to the strong voice of populism. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Mr. Secretary. Thank you, my colleagues, dear Father Alexandru. It's an honor to me to represent my short scientific dissertation in this topic: populism in a society, tasty or tasteless, an attempt of understanding. I have chosen, and I like this article title because, based on the complexity of the issue, we need to distinguish at least two basic sets of criteria on the topic. In addition, as a father of 4 children, I consider it important that sociological research has long shown a decline in the confidence of younger age groups in politics, which is also very significant for them compared to the general trend. And this does not provide much encouragement for the survival of democratic systems in the long run. The level and nature of youth mistrust varies from country to country, but can also be observed in different regions of Europe, for example. Anyway, populism is an old concept in politics. The choice of topic and rhetoric of populists approach is, of course, correlated with current political intent and reflects on and appeals to folk moods. This means, on the one hand, the creation of certain moods and opinions, and on the other hand, the exploitation of existing moods and opinions and their reinforcement by populists in order to achieve their own political goals. Populism is also characterized by a specific political style, and this in the way that is not reprehensive in itself, as this in the long-term goal of any policy serves as a strategy for gaining power. Populists often show a contradiction between the people, so the common people, and the elite. And of course, they claim to represent the interest of the common people in this struggle. Many forms of populism profess the rejection of power elites and institutions, confront intellectualism, and in return proclaim their commitment to common sense, which reflects the voice of the people. Not all populist politicians or theorists have props of reasoning in the use of simplistic words and concepts, even if they often try to interpret populism itself and its main object, the people, flexibly. Populism has been a long-standing concept, taking on many political forms since the 19th century, including fascism and communist movements and ideologies. Populism seems to have succeeded in the Western world in recent decades through and in the context of the advancement of globalization and the population explosion. Today, we are living in the heyday of populism. Populism and nationalism are often linked by common themes, which has resulted in the emergence of national populism in the last century. In the view of contemporary French historian Jean-Pierre Grillo, populism means instrumentalizing the options of people on the part of parties and political figures who claim to be spokesmen for the common people. The majority will, even though the most often belong to the upper social class. Even if these are partly true, leaders who are able to remedy social problems at the political level, many still come from among the elites, i.e., the more educated and wealthy. A specific approach, known interpretation and meaning of populism, especially in Western Europe, is also used. This interprets populism as a set of promising and unrealistic, i.e., irresponsible promises that are sound and popular in political practice. Proponents of this approach says populists simplify what they can and emphasize only reference to the people, anti-elitism, and some cases even nationalism itself. However, the notion of populism in the Anglosphere does not follow this notion. For example, in the United States, the term populism is not used as pejoratively as in Europe. As US Presidents Theodore Roosevelt and Franklin D. Roosevelt can also be considered populist based on modern approaches today, as President Jimmy Carter, for example, declared himself populist. The emergence of this as a political product at the time may have been aided to some extent by the oil crisis in the 1970s, as well as the statesmanship of Barack Obama and Donald Trump as American leaders after the global economic crisis that erupted in 2008. Whether this kind of interpretation of populism in the Anglosphere or a continental European interpretation practice based on its rigid denial, interpreting the concept almost exclusively, pejoratively, and dismissively, will be successful in the long run, it is not yet clear today. One thing is for sure: the rise of the populist tendencies does not in itself mean the end of democracy. Populism is not in itself a reprehensible thing and cannot be seen as a mere repulsive political behavior, so populism alone is not tasteless political and ideological trend. For example, why would it be tasteless, repulsive, if in the wake of the economic crisis, a political party, its leaders and its representatives proclaim that people affected by foreign currency, that should be helped instead of banks? Or is it populist, whether political, ecclesiastical or other, who, for example, wants to involve the banking sector and other sectors in the burden sharing? An important sociological concept here is the elite, a term that mostly refers to well-defined groups of people, such as governing elite, the economic elite, the banking world, CEOs, or the educational elite. German sociologist Michael Hartmann sees that the elite tends to create their own values that ignore the morals of society as a whole. At the same time, this can favor truly extreme trends, meaning the elite has a responsibility. It can also be observed that in many countries, parishes, religious congregations still play an important role in local societies and their basic structures on this day. This also meets the needs of the majority of society, i.e., a significant proportion of citizens still find it useful and even expect churches and religious groups to have a say in the society, whether on cultural or social issues, and to be able to represent the opinion of the people. Any democratic system can only respond appropriately to such and similar societal needs, that is, the opinion of citizens, if it recognizes equal rights to do so. This can also significantly help the situation of social minorities, i.e., the promotion of the interest of more or less separable groups, such as ethnic, religious, or other, within a given society with a specific sense of identity. Churches in many countries are in a good enough position to assert their influence and to confront the truly harmful extremist tendencies of populism, either through their messages or through their actions. Churches can also play their part in this joint effort by drawing citizens' attention of the dangers of extremist populism and involving the democratic majority in the fight for democracy and human rights. Thank you very much. I have to say that unfortunately, I will not be able to attend the rest of this conference, but I wish you a very successful discussion. Thank you very much.
And I will start with Mr. Papahagi. We have a question for you. Could you explain more about your point of church limiting statal or secular claims?
Yes, that's actually quite easy. Nowadays, the state is trying to confiscate even the private aspects of human life, including everything: education, health, thinking, public morality, welfare. There is no area of human existence that the state doesn't have a claim on. And of course, the church can limit the claim of the state by opposing a superior authority to that of the state, and that is the authority of God himself. We Christians do not think that the state has the ultimate word in our lives. Now, most of you have not had the pleasure, between inverted commas, to live in a totalitarian state. I was rather young when communism ended, but we, the ones who lived under communist rule in Eastern Europe, remember quite well what it meant when the state decided what was right and wrong, what you were allowed to say and what you weren't. And I see the same censorship returning nowadays. There is what some scholars like the French Jean Sévillia calls intellectual terrorism. There is a censorship against people who claim different things, and there are things that you are allowed to say and things for which you can be fined or even go to prison nowadays. And sometimes these are even Christian tenets of the Christian belief, of Christian faith, concerning different aspects of our dogma. Consequently, I think that Christianity can work as I don't know, I would say as a rampart, protecting the freedom of expression, protecting the idea of the human person, the dignity of the human person against claims by the state. And above all, it can oppose God to Caesar. And the risk nowadays, of course, is not that the church takes what belongs to Caesar, but that Caesar takes what belongs to God. And that we see increasingly happening all over Europe. Now, there is a second question that came, and thank you, Mrs. Flote, for this question. There was a second question from Frau Kappelhoff that I would like to answer. How can the church navigate between two populisms? Now, in Romania, where Orthodoxy is very powerful, perhaps as powerful or as representative nationally as Catholicism was in Italy 40 years ago, or perhaps not so long ago, this new populist party associates the church to the corrupt elites that constitutes the main idea of populism, and consequently attacks the church. There is less of that in Western Europe. On the other hand, we have a populist party, as I showed, trying to attach the church. There is this annexation approach. So the church, of course, has to resist both anti-clericalism and annexation. And unfortunately, parts of the Orthodox Church seem to regard, after having exposed to this massive contestation over the last few years, some clerics seem to embrace the new populist movement because it goes counter to the other one. And I'm trying to tell everybody that it's important to resist both populist movements, both the one that tries to transform orthodoxy into orthodoxism, that is to say, into a political ideology, and the one trying to get the church out of everything, out of life, out of society. However, the most important thing that we Christians have to oppose populism is our anthropology and our faith. We know that new will be old, that the the knights of anti-corruption today may prove corrupt politicians tomorrow, that Hitler came to power on a discourse against the old corrupt German state, that the Bolsheviks in Russia claimed to free the people, and finally they turned the entire country into a huge prison and exterminated 1/10 of the population. And in some countries like Cambodia, it was 1/2 of the population exterminated to create a new world. We know that the new man will be created eschatologically in the other world, not here on earth. And we know that heaven on earth very often turns to be a real hell. So we know these, and these are, I think, what Christians can bring to society nowadays as a kind of a vaccine, now that it's quite fashionable again, right? As a vaccine against populism, also in its most unsuspected forms, where we think that it works for the progress of society. And actually it works, I think, for leveling, flattening, and indistinction in many cases. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Professor Papahagi. I would like to ask the same thing to Professor Paolo Naso, if he can offer us a point from Italy, from the Protestant churches, from the Catholic Church, if he knows. Please, Professor Naso.
Thank you very much. Of course, speaking about Protestantism in Italy, we have to think about a very small minority, a vocal minority, but a very, very tiny minority. And for centuries, the Protestant minorities in the country have to show their belonging to the Italian body, because the assumption was that only Catholics were really Italian. So going back to the issue of populism, I think that we have to be very, very cautious about the dangerous mix that populism brings. Populism per se is the political approach to try to jump the political mediation of the parties that, as we have seen historically, have been accused to be source of corruption. So populism pretends to be to regenerate the political system in a very clean way. But historically speaking, and I think about the history of Italy and Europe during World War I, populism joined with nationalism, was basically the same mixture. And in a more recent time, populism brings confessionalism. So the legal status of the minorities, religious minorities, is seriously compromised and challenged by populism. Finally, I want to stress how populism and nationalism are strictly related with the idea of exclusivism. We are very, very familiar with expression like Italy first, Hungary first, Italians first, Hungarians first, Romanians first, and so on. Again, going to more theological approach, this can be a Christian approach. We have a sense of a common belongings to the creation of God, a full sense of participation of the destiny of our neighbors, and we pretend to celebrate the union of the children of God instead of celebrating the barriers dividing the children of God. So in this sense, this exclusivist, nationalist approach, typical of at least some kind of populism, seems to be strongly anti-Christian. A real blasphemy, because it creates barriers and divisions when we are called to witness the unity and the sense of a common belonging.
Thank you, Professor Paolo Naso. I have one question for both of you, Mr. Papahagi and Mr. Naso. What do you think about the link between populism and the internet and the social network?
Prego.
Grazie. I think that it is too easy to say that the responsibility of the populist way has to be attributed to internet and the social media. Of course, there is some truth in that. But as we have seen, populism has a very long root, much older than internet. What it creates, and it is a steady case of Italy and the five-star movement, is that probably internet can pretend to be the technical way to overcome the classic political representation. This was a part of the propaganda of the five-star movement, at least at the original phase of the movement. Now you have to vote, and you have to give your representation to somebody else. Now, with the platform with capital M, will give you the possibility to decide to vote. You will be the political decision maker, just clicking from your computer. So the idea of a telematic democracy has been used by the Five Stars movement. The political results of this illusion has been simply catastrophic. They selected the parliamentarians in this way, and some people have been elected with a few hundreds of telematic votes. And they show in the parliament they are totally unskilled to serve the country from that position. So there is an illusion, and probably the new technology strengthens this illusion that it is possible to create a different management of the democratic process, bypassing the political representation, what we call the parties. This is the difference. But in my opinion, I think that populism has roots deeper and older than the new technologies. So new technologies are just a new problem, a new challenge, but are not the problem.
Thank you, Mr. Paolo Naso. Mr. Adrian Papahagi?
I think that all instruments are morally neutral, of course. A knife can be used to cut weeds or to prepare food or to kill someone, of course. New media, social media can be very helpful to increase democracy, to allow citizens to express themselves, especially under tyranny. And you see that in Russia or in Belarus or in other countries, right, where people have this means. It multiplies, of course, voices. It gives voice to everybody. It's like having your own TV set in your home. Everybody becomes a broadcaster, right? So the monopoly of state is weakened, and that's a good thing, I think. Of course, messages can be manipulated, and you have seen how that happens. You can shut down whoever you don't agree with, whether it's Trump or someone else. And you can manipulate votes. In Romania, this Our Party, nobody saw it coming. Nobody. It was not even in the polls. Nowhere. And then it got 9% and entered the parliament because all their campaign was through devious things. Now, of course, it's also easy to circulate fake news, but then there is the government fake news that comes through official televisions. How fake can that be? I mean, what comes through CDF or France 2 at times can be as fake as what your neighbor is circulating on Facebook and Twitter. Consequently, what Christians must have today is the ability to discern. It's, I should think, it's prudence, moderation, all those old virtues that were being preached erstwhile and that we still rely on. So Facebook is neither good or bad. It can become terribly bad, or it can be it can offer leverage against totalitarianism. That's something that is quite obvious to me. And actually, we are using it all the time to communicate, even good things. So why not?
Thank you. Thank you. And I saw that we are running out of time. So I think we should enjoy a small break of 50 minutes. And if possible, for you as speakers, if your agenda is available, you can join us after the break.
Thank you very much.
I would like to thank you, all of speakers and all of participants, for this interesting and fascinating discussion about populism. Personally, for me, it was a rich one. I have found a lot of information and links between history and actions in present. And I hope that that session of study cases is useful for us. Many thanks.